I never thought I'd see my father cry. He was always the strongest man I knew, a decorated Vietnam veteran who had survived firefights, jungle warfare, and the loss of his closest friends in battle. But today he broke down completely as we stood looking at the pile of rubble that used to be his home. Before we start the story, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. My name is James Mitchell, and I'm the District Attorney for Westlake County. My father, Colonel Thomas Mitchell, built this house with his own hands after returning from 2 tours in Vietnam. It was his sanctuary, his piece of American soil that he fought so hard to protect. Now it was gone, demolished by an HOA president who had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Who would do this? My father asked, his voice barely a whisper as he picked up a broken picture frame from the debris. Inside was a photo of his unit in Vietnam, now cracked and covered in dust. Everything I built, everything I saved. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling his body shake with grief and anger. I'll find out, Dad. And I promise you they will pay for this. It had all started 3 months ago when the Pine Grove Estates development began expanding toward our side of the lake. My father's property sat on 5 acres of prime lakefront land that had been in our family for generations. His custom-built 4,500 square foot home, with its natural stone exterior, wraparound porch and wall of windows facing the water, was now worth well over $2 million. More importantly, it was filled with 50 years of memories, military memorabilia, and the handcrafted furniture my father had made during his recovery from the physical and mental wounds of war. Building that house had quite literally saved his life when he came home broken from Vietnam. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a notice taped to his mailbox. Property violation. Non-conforming architectural elements must be brought to code within 30 days. My father had called me, confused. Jimmy, what is this? I don't belong to any homeowners association. He was right. His property predated Pine Grove Estates by decades. There was no legal way he could be subject to their rules. I told him to ignore it, thinking it was just a mistake. But the notices kept coming, each more threatening than the last. Then came the fines, $100 per day for unauthorized landscaping, $250 for a non-approved exterior color scheme, $500 for his American flag display that was supposedly too large. When my father tried to explain to the HOA office that his property wasn't part of their jurisdiction, he was dismissed by a woman who introduced herself as Elizabeth Harrington, president of Pine Grove Estates HOA. Rules are rules, she had told him with a cold smile. No exceptions. My father described her to me later, mid-50s, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothes, and always carrying a clipboard. The neighbors called her Clipboard Karen behind her back, but to her face, they were too afraid to challenge her. She had a reputation for targeting anyone who dared to stand out or speak up. As district attorney, I could have stepped in officially at that point. But my father, proud and stubborn as always, insisted on handling it himself. I fought for this country, Jimmy. I can fight my own battles. So I respected his wishes, offering only legal advice while he filed the proper paperwork showing his property was exempt from HOA jurisdiction. I should have done more. I should have seen what was coming. 3 days ago, I'd gone to Washington, D.C. for a national conference of district attorneys. My father called me the first night, sounding worried. There was a man here today, he said, taking pictures of the house. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was from the county inspector's office. But something didn't feel right. I reassured him, promised to check county records when I got home, and told him not to worry. That was the last conversation we had before my neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, called me in a panic. James, you need to come home right now, she said, her voice shaking. They're tearing down your father's house. I caught the first flight back, my mind racing with questions and fury building in my chest. When I arrived, it was already too late. My father's beautiful home was reduced to broken timber and crushed stone. 50 years of memories bulldozed into the dirt. Mrs. Lawson filled me in, her eyes wet with tears. It happened so fast. These big trucks showed up yesterday morning. Your father tried to stop them, showed them papers, but that woman with the clipboard, Elizabeth, she had some kind of court order. She said the house was structurally unsound and a danger to the community. Where's my father now? I asked, dreading the answer. Hospital, she said quietly. He tried to block the bulldozer. Had some kind of episode. They said it might be his heart or maybe just shock. I found my father in the county hospital, sedated but stable. The doctors called it an acute stress reaction, his PTSD from Vietnam triggered by the violent destruction of his safe space. I sat by his bed until he woke up, trying to control the rage building inside me. When I returned to the property the next day with my father, who insisted on seeing it despite the doctor's advice, the full extent of the devastation became clear. Not just the house but everything in it was gone. His medals, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, 2 silver stars. The handmade dining table where our family had gathered for holidays. The custom rifle cabinet that held his service weapon. The flag that had draped his best friend's coffin, which he'd promised to keep safe. All destroyed. As we stood amid the ruins, a shiny black SUV pulled up to the property. Elizabeth Harrington stepped out, clipboard in hand, looking irritated to find us there. She didn't recognize me, we'd never met, and I wasn't in my usual courtroom attire. "This area is off limits," she said sharply. "The demolition zone isn't safe for civilians." My father straightened his back, summoning the dignity of the soldier he once was. "This is my property. My home that you destroyed." Elizabeth's face showed no compassion, no remorse. "Mr. Mitchell, your property was condemned by county order after failing multiple safety inspections. The documentation was all properly filed." She glanced at her clipboard. "You were given notice." "That's a lie," my father said, his voice shaking. "No inspectors ever came inside my home. No notices of condemnation were ever delivered." She sighed like she was dealing with a difficult child. "The notices were sent according to protocol. If you failed to receive them, that's hardly my concern. Now I must ask you both to leave before I call security." I had remained silent, watching this woman's callous disregard for my father's loss. Now I stepped forward. "I'm curious about these safety inspections, Ms. Harrington. Who conducted them?" She glanced at me with annoyance. "That's confidential HOA business. And you are?" "James Mitchell," I said calmly. "Thomas's son." "Well, Mr. Mitchell, your father's non-compliant structure has been a blight on our community development plans for months. The board unanimously approved this action." "Did the board approve forging county documents?" I asked. "Because I happen to know there were no legitimate safety inspections conducted on this property." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you accusing me of something? Because I don't appreciate your tone." "I'm not just accusing you," I said, reaching for my wallet and flipping it open to show my identification. "I'm informing you that as the district attorney for this county, I will be investigating you for fraud, forgery of official documents, destruction of property, and abuse of power." The blood drained from Elizabeth's face as she stared at my credentials. For a moment she seemed genuinely shocked into silence. Then she recovered, lifting her chin defiantly. "You're bluffing. Even if you are who you say, you can't investigate this case. It's a conflict of interest." "You're right about the conflict of interest," I agreed. "Which is why I'll be appointing a special prosecutor. But make no mistake, Ms. Harrington, every aspect of this demolition will be scrutinized. Every document examined. Every decision questioned." I stepped closer to her. "And if, as I suspect, you've broken the law, you will face the full consequences." "I have connections in this county," she said, her voice slightly less confident. "So do I," I replied. "Starting with the judges who supposedly signed these condemnation orders. I had my office checked this morning, no such orders exist." She backed toward her SUV. "This is all a misunderstanding. The board acted on information provided by experts." "Save it for your defense attorney," I said. "You're going to need one." As she drove away, I turned to my father, whose expression had changed from grief to determination. "She picked the wrong house to mess with, didn't she, Jimmy?" For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. "She certainly did, Dad." My investigation began immediately. I recused myself officially due to the personal connection, but appointed Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chin as special prosecutor. Sarah was the toughest lawyer in my office, with a perfect conviction record and a personal dislike for abuses of power. We started by securing the demolition site as a crime scene. Forensics teams documented everything, photographing the destruction and collecting evidence. Next, we obtained search warrants for the HOA offices and Elizabeth Harrington's home and personal records. What we found was even worse than I'd suspected. Elizabeth had created an elaborate scheme targeting not just my father's property, but several others that didn't fit her vision for Pine Grove Estates. She had forged inspection documents, falsified county letterhead, and even created a fake stamp mimicking the county engineer's seal. Her emails revealed her true motivation. Pine Grove Estates was partnering with a developer called Westlake Luxury Properties to build high-end condos on the lakefront. My father's land was essential to their plans, but he had refused multiple offers to sell. Elizabeth stood to receive a consultant's fee of $250,000 if she could secure the property. One particularly damning email to the developer read, "The old veteran is stubborn, but I've found a more permanent solution. By next month, that eyesore will be gone, and the land will be ready for development. Sometimes you have to break a few rules to make progress." We also discovered that Elizabeth had been embezzling from the HOA funds for years. Inflated contracts went to companies owned by her relatives. Special assessments collected for community improvements somehow always ended up funding renovations to her own property. The extent of corruption was staggering, but the most shocking discovery was a detailed dossier she kept on my father. She had investigated his background, his finances, his medical history, everything except who his son was. If she had bothered to complete that basic research, she might have avoided her catastrophic mistake. Within 10 days we had assembled an airtight case. Sarah obtained arrest warrants for Elizabeth and 2 HOA board members who had knowingly participated in the scheme. But I wanted more than just an arrest. I wanted Elizabeth to face the community she had terrorized. The monthly Pine Grove Estates HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Thursday at the community clubhouse. By 6:30 the parking lot was full. Word had spread that something big was happening. I had asked my father if he wanted to attend. Despite his doctor's concerns, he insisted on being there. "I need to see this through," he said as I helped him with his tie. He had chosen to wear his military dress uniform, medals and all. At 73 he still cut an impressive figure in it. We arrived just as the meeting was about to begin. Elizabeth sat at the front table, looking confident as ever with her clipboard and gavel. She clearly hadn't realized what was coming. "I call this meeting to order," she announced, tapping her gavel. First item on the agenda, the new landscaping requirements for the east entrance. My father and I stood at the back of the room. Several people recognized him and whispered among themselves. Elizabeth noticed the disruption and frowned. "Excuse me, we have a procedure here. If you have comments, you need to wait until the public comment period at the end." Sarah Chin stepped forward from where she had been waiting near the side door. "Elizabeth Harrington, this meeting is now adjourned." She held up her credentials. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chin, and I have a warrant for your arrest." The room erupted in murmurs as Sarah read the charges. Fraud, forgery of official documents, criminal destruction of property, embezzlement of HOA funds, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. 2 uniformed officers entered and approached the front table. Elizabeth's face contorted with disbelief and outrage. "This is absurd. Everything I did was approved by the board and legal counsel." "Your legal counsel has already agreed to testify against you in exchange for immunity," Sarah informed her. "As have several board members." Elizabeth's eyes darted around the room looking for supporters but finding none. The community she had bullied for years was watching her downfall with stunned silence. "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice rising. "Do you know who my husband is?" "He plays golf with the mayor." "My father plays golf with the governor," I said, walking toward the front of the room with my father beside me. "But more importantly, he served this country with honor while you destroyed his home for profit." The officers handcuffed Elizabeth as I addressed the crowd. "Many of you know my father, Colonel Thomas Mitchell. Some of you might know that I'm James Mitchell, the district attorney for this county. What you might not know is that 3 days ago, Elizabeth Harrington ordered the illegal demolition of my father's home, a home that was never part of this HOA, a home built by a decorated Vietnam veteran after serving his country." I held up printouts of Elizabeth's emails. She did this to make way for luxury condos, for which she would receive a $250,000 payment. She forged county documents, falsified inspection reports, and embezzled your HOA fees for years. As Elizabeth was led away, still protesting her innocence, my father stepped forward. The room fell silent as this elderly veteran in full dress uniform addressed his neighbors. "I built that house when I came home from Vietnam," he said, his voice strong despite everything he'd been through. "Back then many didn't welcome us home. That house was my piece of America, the country I fought for." Miss Harrington didn't just destroy a building. She destroyed the one place where the nightmares couldn't find me. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he finished speaking. As we left the meeting, neighbors approached him one by one, offering condolences, support, and in many cases, apologies for not standing up to Elizabeth sooner. Elizabeth Harrington's trial began 3 months later. She had hired an expensive defense attorney from the city, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Former HOA board members testified about her intimidation tactics. Financial experts detailed her embezzlement schemes. The forged documents were examined by experts who confirmed they were created on her personal computer. the most powerful testimony came from my father. Dressed again in his uniform, he spoke about what his home had meant to him, about the irreplaceable mementos lost in the demolition, and about the nightmares that had returned since losing his sanctuary. After 8 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Michaels did not hide his disgust for Elizabeth's actions. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, "this court has seen many cases of fraud and corruption, but few that combine such callous disregard for the law with such a personal cruelty. You destroyed not just a house but a home. Not just any home, but one built by a man who risked his life for this country." He sentenced her to 12 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 8. Additionally, she was ordered to pay $2.5 million in restitution, $2 million for the value of the home and its contents, plus $500,000 in punitive damages. Her assets were frozen, including the consultant's fee she had already received from the developer. The developer, Westlake Luxury Properties, faced its own legal troubles. Their permits were revoked and several executives were charged as co-conspirators in the fraud. The company eventually settled a civil suit with my father for an undisclosed but substantial amount. As for the Pine Grove Estates HOA, it underwent a complete restructuring. New bylaws were written with clear limitations on power. Financial transparency was mandated, with independent audits required annually. Most importantly, the community elected leaders who understood that their role was to serve, not to rule. 6 months after Elizabeth's conviction, construction began on my father's new home. Using the insurance money, the restitution, and the settlement funds, we were able to rebuild on the same spot, following the original plans but with modern improvements. The community rallied around the project. Neighbors volunteered labor, local businesses donated materials, and fellow veterans came from across the state to help. What had begun as a terrible tragedy became a powerful example of healing and justice. On Veterans Day, 1 year after the demolition, we held a housewarming celebration. Over 200 people gathered to welcome my father back to his land. The new house stood proud on the lakefront, its natural stone exterior gleaming in the sun, the wraparound porch filled with well-wishers, and a massive American flag flying from a new, taller flagpole. Inside, a special room had been created to replace my father's lost military memorabilia. Veterans groups had donated replacements for his medals. Fellow soldiers sent photos and mementos from their shared time in Vietnam. The governor himself presented my father with a flag that had flown over the state capitol in his honor. As the celebration continued outside, my father and I stood on the dock, looking out over the water. "You know, Jimmy," he said quietly, "in Vietnam I learned that evil only wins when good people do nothing." Elizabeth Harrington thought she was untouchable because for years, no one stood up to her. I nodded, thinking of all the people who had been intimidated and bullied before she finally picked the wrong target. "The biggest mistake she made wasn't messing with the district attorney's father," my father continued. "It was thinking that rules and laws don't apply to people like her." 1 month later, the state legislature passed the Veterans Property Protection Act, inspired by my father's case. The law created special protections for properties owned by veterans, requiring extraordinary documentation and verification before any action could be taken against them by local authorities or private organizations like HOAs. Elizabeth Harrington now serves her sentence at the Women's Correctional Facility 30 miles from the lake. Sometimes I drive past it on my way to my father's house for Sunday dinner. I never stop to visit her, though she has sent several requests to meet. Some actions can't be forgiven, only accounted for. My father has found peace in his new home. The nightmares that returned after the demolition have subsided again. On clear days he sits on his porch watching boats on the lake, and on stormy ones he works in his new woodshop, creating furniture with his hands just as he did after returning from war. Last week, a reporter asked him if he was still angry about what happened. "I'm disappointed that someone could be so callous," he answered thoughtfully. "But I'm grateful too. This experience showed me how many good people there still are in this world, ready to stand up for what's right when called upon." As for me, I continue my work as district attorney with a renewed sense of purpose. Every case that crosses my desk is an opportunity to ensure that justice is served, that the powerful are held accountable, and that no one is above the law. Elizabeth Harrington destroyed my father's home because she thought her position made her untouchable. She never bothered to check who she was really dealing with. She never imagined that the old Vietnam veteran whose life she was dismantling had a son who understood the law better than she ever would. She learned too late that sometimes, the person whose property you're illegally demolishing is the father of the district attorney. And that's a mistake you only make once.